Today's video is gonna be one of an open discussion about the one thing consumers of any type of media dislike, and that's cut content. I don't think any of us are new to this concept. For us who partake in the anime medium, it's a bit more common to identify. Whether you're somebody who is well versed in the source material or an anime only who comes to learn about cut content after consuming an adaptation, it happens a lot more often than we may like. Now, what prompted me to make this video is gonna take us back to last season when looking at Classroom of the Elite's third season. For the record, as an anime only, I really do enjoy the show. Season 3, in my opinion, had some of the best highs of the series yet, and things seem to be amping up with an incoming first year class. However, while gazing from afar on social media, I started to see various complaints about the adaptation. Granted, these complaints about the anime have been around for some time, but I really felt them come season 3. Between Twitter and doing some brief follow-up with other sources, there's a list of things that have really rubbed fans of the source material the wrong way. Character interactions, expressions, inner monologue, important scenes, moments of characterization cut out across the board from the seasons. Now, while it's common for some things to be cut, what is left out can gradually become quite substantial when looking at the total amount of it, a snowball effect if you will. Which kinda got me thinking, as much as the anime community complains about almost anything down to a frame, the issue of cut content is not talked about largely. Most likely because it's a case-by-case basis, but even so, you have to ask yourself, why does it happen to such extensive amounts? Now, when looking at source materials, we primarily deal with manga, webtoons, and light novels, each of them having varying degrees of cut content across different adaptations, with some so severe it may as well be a butchering of the adaptation altogether. However, I'd argue that in the order that I called out the different types of source material, the amount of consistent cut content gradually gets more intense. Starting with manga, we of course know of many adaptations that have either skipped or cut content to the point that people beg for reboots. Tokyo Ghoul, The Promised Neverland, you get the picture. However, manga does give animation studios what I label as a visual blueprint. From the surroundings to choreography and facial expressions, they have the general idea of what a scene looks like. The rest is up to the teams in charge and any creative choices made, but even with an episode count, you have a guideline. Of course, the one thing that should be taken into consideration at all times is pacing. At the most, an adaptation will always strive to get the most crucial aspects of storytelling across, and sometimes things may be cut for the sake of flow and reaching that perfect episode runtime amount they are allotted. Sometimes it may be a comedic scene, and others it may be something much more substantial, but for the most part, things work out 90% of the time. You don't hear much about major cut content complaints from the manga adapted shows that come out across the seasons, but at least that's in my experience. This is all an observation, of course, but looking at some of the recent series that have blown up especially, I think you can see where I'm coming from. Now, webtoons is where the rift really begins to show, as the amount of cut content on a weekly basis per episode tends to stack up over time. I know everyone has Solo Leveling on their mind, but for this conversation, I want to bring up Tower of God and briefly touch on God of High School. Now, just like manga, webtoons especially have that visual blueprint, going a bit further considering they are typically in color. Compared to manga, however, this is a type of source material that has taken some serious trial and error. I think that for the most part, Solo Leveling broke the curse, delivering an overall positive adaptation. However, I once again want to bring up pacing, and the fact that unlike magazines, which tend to have a page count restriction and format, webtoons from my knowledge does not have that limit. Some chapters and climaxes could have a substantial amount of content and details, which may not make it into the anime, thus leading me back to Tower of God. Now, I enjoyed season 1 a lot. I mean, the finale had just about everyone heated. However, not even that was spared from the cut content conversation, which takes us to content creator Annie News. Now, personally, I don't know too many content creators who cover cut content, but they have a playlist that tackles the vast majority of cut content across the first season. Some details small and others can be considered quite big, especially when looking at characterization. I actually took to the Tower of God Reddit just to see other perspectives, and one comment that stuck out to me was that the majority of the main cast feel entirely different compared to the source, practically different characters, which is quite a claim. So if you are a Tower of God reader, let me know in the comments how you feel in regards to all the content pertaining to season 1. For a world like Tower of God though, you do have to wonder just how much detail was cut out, considering the story heavily relies on mystery and the details that come from certain characters' backstory via lineage. I've seen takes about characters such as Rack, for example, that has been reduced to comedic relief so far in the anime, though he has actually had some quite serious moments early on. Khun being another example, as from my understanding, he was a lot more strategic and made things happen behind the scenes a lot more in comparison to the anime. These details can end up giving you an entirely different impression on the character or a lack thereof, and is exactly why people do encourage you to go back and read the source material. God of High School being the butchering so bad that even I ended up going back and reading it only to fully understand why so many people were upset. There were so many details and fights that did not get done properly, and it's no wonder. As to why this may happen with webtoon adaptations, again, I still think they are in a form of trial and error right now. Granted, Solo Leveling is currently the best one yet, but in my opinion, the narrative is pretty straightforward that I doubt much is missing from what we got in the anime. Outside of planning, I'm not sure if the structure and format of webtoons plays a part as to why a series may end up having so much cut content, especially when considering pacing. There honestly isn't enough information to go and make a large claim, but if I were to make assumptions, they would probably apply to light novels as well when it comes to the amount of abundant detail and dialogue. Now, of course, this conversation doesn't apply to all light novels. Stories like the 86 has been said to be pretty close to a perfect adaptation among others. However, I've noticed that some of the long-term adaptations have really had some issues, notably fantasy series alongside Classroom of the Elite. Now, in comparison to the other two, light novels are heavily text-based pieces of literature. Within these volumes, there are multitudes of passages that get down to the nitty-gritty when it comes to painting the best narrative possible using efficient detail, as there are not going to be a lot of pictures to get that point across. Among character dialogue, there is all sorts of information to describe the environment, a character's actions and expressions, and most notably, inner monologue. The lack of the visual blueprint, I'm sure, is greatly taken into consideration, and is also why it's important for good communication among a team when talking about animating a scene or exchange. You have to essentially create that layout as to how you believe it should look, because not even the author may know exactly how every little detail should come to life. I want to imagine that this adds on a lot of extra work onto the planning process, and once again, pacing must always come into play. If there is one thing that for sure tends to get cut from an adaptation, it's inner monologue, mainly because some monologue can run on for quite some time, and while it does give the reader a very insightful look into the mind of a character, it would kinda drag on when it comes to a viewer. Additionally, I know there tends to be a lot of other cut content that, whether heavily correlated to the current plot or not, gets cut, which ends up affecting a multitude of things in the long run, especially characterization and interpreting relationships. Hence why, when it comes to adapting something, the one main rule that is pretty much followed to a T is prioritize the essential. For light novels, there tends to be so much more intricate details and scenes happening over time and in different areas that it just realistically would not make it into the anime. Even if a series had larger episode counts and perfect production conditions, getting every single detail in there from so much text would just not work, because pacing and episode runtime will always reign supreme. Hence why, regardless if something is major or minor, if it is felt it can be removed without taking away from the immediate situation at hand, then it is up for removal, which in the long run can hurt an adaptation overall, as the story begins to add a lot more complexity amongst its cast and narrative nuance. Focusing on the key points of the main character, simplify as much as possible, rely on visual storytelling, present what is purely relevant to the ongoing situation. If these were to be thought of as base guidelines for light novel adaptations, then it makes sense as to why there is so much cut out over time. As anime only for series like ReZero, I find myself really enjoying the story, and yet I have come to learn that there is also just so much I have missed out on. Fellow content creator Asaratha HS made me go back and read the content that is in season 2, and trust me when I say that the content you come to learn about is pretty substantial, all things considered. In Asa's own words, he described the result in a way that I believe can apply to a variety of series. That being, it's a good anime, but not the best adaptation. I can imagine that this is how a lot of people may feel who are really invested in all those details. Danmachi, The Eminence in Shadow, Mushoku Tensei, Shield Hero, they all got their cuts and scars among their adaptations. At the end of the day, there really isn't some clear-cut outline that can tell us what exactly makes something worth cutting from an adaptation, and even then, it'd probably come down to a case-by-case basis. Every series handles things differently, and some adaptations may come out better than others depending on the circumstances. Even when taking into consideration of pacing and episode counts, there's no way of telling how the discussions go behind the scenes, and thus all around making this a complicated issue to navigate altogether. A lot of people care about these details and information as it furthers the audience's understanding of the character or situation at hand. At the same time, majority of the anime-only audience, myself included, really do enjoy the anime adaptations, though we may not know how much impact the cut content may have on our experience. One could say that cut content is but but a natural flaw when it comes to adapting pieces of media. But even if that were the case, should it be one of those situations that overall is what it is? If it ends up negatively impacting the story later on, should it be overlooked because we know the adaptation can't squeeze everything in there, or is there something that should be looked at to be tackled someday? I think being able to tell a story to the fullest is very important, but a major factor to top it off is that if you want more of something in this industry, it's gonna get pricey, and that right there is a kill blow for a lot of final decisions. With that though, will bring me to the end of this video. As always, thank you for watching, and make sure to leave all your thoughts in the comment section down below. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you all in the next video.